Sarah stood still in front of the resort room's large window, her eyes focused on the waves breaking into the golden sands under the brilliant sunset. The warmth of the surroundings filled the room, but her heart remained heavy and cold. She gripped the coffee cup tightly, the heat from the cup failing to melt the emptiness that was gnawing at her chest. Behind her, Michael, her husband, was absorbed in his phone, his eyes fixed on the screen as if nothing else in the world could hold his attention. Gorgeous view. Isn't it? Michael's tone was flat, more habitual than real, and he spoke abruptly. Sarah didn't respond but nodded slightly in the glass mirror. She saw her own image, a ghost of herself, pale and fatigued. Who am I? The question still rang in her head, but she dared not respond. Where is Adam? Michael asked, his eyes still on his phone outside on the balcony. She answered quickly, trying to maintain her composure. In reality, she had been feeling strange since Adam, Michael's son from his first marriage, returned after years of studying abroad. There was something about his gaze and the way he looked at her that made her feel like she was being watched. A feeling she wasn't sure whether she wanted to face or avoid. Suddenly, a loud noise came from the balcony, shattering the fragile silence. Sarah's hands loosened, causing the coffee cup to slip and fall to the floor. Shattering. Michael looked up, frowning. What was that? When she opened the balcony door, the image before her made Sarah freeze. But before he could stand up, she was already running to the door. Adam was leaning on the rail, but his gaze was not that of a son gazing at his stepmother. Rather, it was filled with complex feelings that Sarah might not have wanted to understand. Are you aware of how different you are? Adam said, his voice low and husky as though he had been holding back those words for far too long. Sarah stepped back instinctively, her lips parted. But no words came out in that moment. She realized this was no longer just an ordinary family vacation. A hidden current was rising and she had no idea if she had the strength to withstand it. Sarah stood silently gazing at the sea. Yet her mind couldn't stop replaying a tangle of memories from the past. The sunset was fading, casting a dim shadow over the horizon like a veil that cloaked everything. The waves crashed against the shore in rhythmic persistence, as though reminding her that once something happens, it leaves a mark indelible no matter how desperately one might wish to erase it. Inside the room, the sound of Michael's pacing mingled with the soft clicks of his phone keyboard. Elena called. We're having dinner with her tonight, he announced in a flat tone, as though it were just another item on his endless checklist. Sarah furrowed her brow slightly but didn't turn to look at him. Who is she that you're so eager to arrange dinner with her? The question escaped her lips before she realized it, her voice calm but tinged with a chill like the cold wind rolling in from the ocean at night. Michael paused for a moment before responding with casual indifference. Elena's just an old friend, you know that she just happened to be here. He spoke as if trying to reassure her. But Sarah caught the slight evasiveness in his reflection in the glass. An old friend? Coincidence? She wasn't sure. She believed. Doubt began creeping into her thoughts like an icy draft slipping through the cracks in the walls. That evening, Elena arrived at the restaurant with a radiant smile and a confidence that demanded attention from her red dress clung to her figure. Her sharp eyes glinting and the way she tilted her head while talking to Michael made Sarah feel overshadowed as Michael dove into reminiscing about old times. Elena occasionally cast subtle glances at Sarah, glances laced with meaning as if she was sending a message only to the two of them could decipher. You're a writer, aren't you? Sarah nodded slightly when Elena inquired, interrupting her tangled thoughts. Yes, but I only write simple things. Nothing too remarkable, Elena said with a look that was both admiring and somewhat critical. Oh, don't be modest. I've always believed that authors are quite good at concealing their actual feelings. Yet nevertheless, everything is revealed in their writing. Isn't that right? When they got back to their room, Sarah discovered Adam sitting on the balcony, his eyes fixed on the dark expanse of the night sky. She went out to join him. But before she could say anything, Adam broke the silence with a low, gruff voice. Elena seems to enjoy causing trouble, doesn't she? The remark cut Sarah like a sharp blade, and she forced a smile. But unease began to bloom in her chest, and she wondered what exactly Elena was insinuating. Do you believe that Sarah was taken aback by his remarks and did not anticipate him bringing her up? Adam shrugged, his eyes still on the horizon, as she asked, trying to sound calm. She talks a lot about my dad. But the way she speaks makes it seem like they have a history together that I've never heard of." He paused, then turned to face Sarah and asked, "Do you know anything, Adam K?" In response to the question that left Sarah speechless. She remembered Alina's cryptic remarks at dinner that hinted at her past and secrets no one knew. Anxiety tightened in her chest as she recalled how Alina's eyes lingered on her, almost daring her to react. The following morning, Michael and Elena left for a brief meeting that they decided was too unimportant for Sarah to attend. Leaving her alone, Sarah chose to take a walk around the resort in the hopes of finding some peace. But instead she came across Adam standing at the pathway leading to the beach with a small box in his hands. When she got close, he opened it, revealing a collection of old photos of his mother. "Did you ever meet her?" Adam's tone dropped to a somber whisper as he asked. "My dad was always busy, and she was the only one there for me. But when she died, it felt like everything fell apart." And Sarah felt the raw pain in his words, and it made her heart ache. Sarah shook her head, her eyes glued to the photos of a young woman who looked back at her with a gentle smile and hauntingly sad eyes. Adam's tone was thick as though each word carried the weight of a buried memory. She wanted to console him. But could Adam look at her with his piercing gaze first? And inquiring, "But I'm not sure I even know her or my dad completely anymore since I know they've concealed things." "You're also concealing something, aren't you?" At his inquiry, Sarah paused. She had no idea what Adam was getting at, but the intensity of his stare left her feeling vulnerable and exposed. It was then that she knew this trip was about more than simply rest. It was a place where every secret, no matter how deeply buried, was beginning to rise to the surface. That evening, after the tense dinner filled with Alina's veiled insinuations, Sarah felt an unbearable suffocation creeping up on her. She stepped out onto the balcony where the cool ocean breeze offered a fleeting reprieve from the overwhelming pressure in her chest. The night had fallen completely, leaving only faint glimmers of light from distant street lamps reflected on the surface of the sea leaning against the railing. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her restless thoughts. But inside everything remained in turmoil. "You're still awake this late?" Adam's low voice emerged from behind her, startling her enough to make her turn quickly. He stood at the balcony door wearing a thin t-shirt and an air of languid nonchalance. But his eyes were sharp, cutting through the darkness as if they could see right into her. Sarah forced a smile, one that barely masked the storm brewing within her. "I couldn't sleep," she replied, avoiding his gaze. "The air here makes me think more than usual." Adam stepped out, shoving his hands into his pockets, his eyes never leaving. "Do you always think this much? Or is it only that when someone like Elena appears?" His words pierced her like a knife, and she wasn't sure what he was getting at, but it was obvious that Adam could see through the discomfort she had been trying to conceal. "You don't like her, do you?" Adam paused, looking at the horizon. "I don't hate her. I just think she enjoys digging into things that don't need to be unearthed. Like she knows too much but only chooses to drop pieces of it to see how people react." Sarah attempted to change the topic, but Adam smirked, his half-smile laced with irony. "It's the same with my dad. They're both good at hiding things. But they always leave something exposed if you look closely enough." She sensed that Adam wasn't just talking about Michael or Elena. Perhaps he was pointing at her as well, telling her that no matter how hard she tried to hide it, he could see it. The silence between them became heavy, filled only by the rhythmic crashing of waves on the shore. "Do you ever feel like you're living a life that doesn't belong to you?" Adam asked abruptly, his voice dropping into a deeper, more serious tone, as if the question had been bothering him for a while. Sarah turned to face him. Surprised by his candor, she asked, "What do you mean?" But she knew exactly what he was talking about. As if she were playing a part, Adam continued, his eyes locked onto hers with such intensity that she felt her pulse quicken. "Doing everything he could to keep the peace and satisfy other people's expectations. But in the process, you've forgotten who you really are." Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady herself against the wave of emotions his words stirred within her. "I think everyone feels that way sometimes," she replied, in her voice trembling slightly as though she didn't quite believe her own words. Adam took a step closer, narrowing the already small gap between them. "I don't think that's the life you deserve," he said, his voice warm but firm. "You shouldn't live like that." His words pierced straight into Sarah's core, peeling back the layers of her mind to reveal a part of herself she had buried for so long she couldn't find the strength to reply. Only feeling her breath grow shallow under the weight of his gaze, Adam's eyes lingered on her face filled with a kind of tenderness that she couldn't understand or perhaps didn't want. It's late. You should go to bed, Sarah murmured, breaking the heavy silence between them. She turned to walk back into the room. But Adam's hand caught her arm, gentle yet firm. She froze, unable to move, unwilling to meet his eyes. Sarah, Adam said softly, for the first time addressing her without the formal stepmother or any distance. His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried a weight that made her heart race. I don't know what I'm doing, but I know I can't pretend not to feel this. Sarah stood still, her legs rooted in place. She could feel Adam's breath behind her, so close that she could hear his heartbeat. She knew she needed to walk away to end this conversation before it spiraled out of control. But a part of her, a part she had kept buried deep inside for far too long, didn't want to leave. A part of her longed for what she had denied herself for years, a connection, a moment of being truly seen. When she finally turned back to face him, their eyes met and time seemed to freeze. His gaze wasn't that of a young man seeking approval or comfort, was the gaze of someone who had seen the cracks in her soul and wasn't afraid to acknowledge them. In that moment, Sarah realized she had crossed a line she had sworn she would never approach. Neither of them spoke. It was as if an invisible force pulled them closer, and when Adam leaned in, Sarah didn't stop him. Everything around them faded away, leaving only the present moment, a moment that both of them knew was wrong, yet neither could resist. When it was over, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the wall in front of her. Adam sat beside her, just as silent. They didn't exchange a single word, but the silence between them was no longer one of distance. It was a silence of complicity. A shared understanding of the irrevocable bond they had just forged, and the certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. The morning sunlight filtered softly through the thin curtains, gently illuminating Sarah's face. But she felt no warmth from it. Everything seemed hazy, as though last night had been a strange dream she couldn't escape. She lay there motionless, afraid that even the smallest movement or breath might shatter the fragile reality. She clung to beside her. Adam had already left. The bedroom was eerily quiet, but the stillness brought her no peace. She stepped into the bathroom, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes sunken, as if carrying the weight of an entire world. Sarah couldn't stop asking herself, what have I done, before she could dwell on the question any further. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts, yanking her back to the present. Michael. It had to be Michael. Sarah, are you okay? Elena wants to see you at the restaurant. Michael's voice called out lightly, somehow making her heartbeat quicken. Sarah composed herself, taking a deep breath before answering. I'll be there in a moment at the restaurant. Elena was already waiting, impeccably dressed in a sleek black dress, her sharp eyes radiating readiness for battle. When Sarah walked in, Elena greeted her with a smirk, one that Sarah couldn't decipher. Michael was busy scrolling through his phone, oblivious to the silent tension crackling between the two women. Sarah, you look tired. Didn't sleep well? Elena asked, her voice sweet but laced with something mocking. Sarah felt her blood run cold. She couldn't tell if Elena knew anything, but every word the woman spoke felt like a trap. The breakfast dragged on in a heavy silence. Sarah barely touched her food, her mind circling back to the events of last night and the way Adam had looked at her before leaving in the room. Michael noticed nothing unusual, but Elena did. She kept her eyes on Sarah, scrutinizing her as though peeling back every layer to expose her secrets. After the meal, Elena left with Michael, leaving Sarah alone just as she began to feel the faintest sense of relief. Adam walked into the restaurant. He wore a simple white t-shirt. His demeanor is casual, but something about his presence unsettled her. He sat down beside her, his gaze unwavering on her face. You can't just pretend like nothing happened, Adam said, his voice low. Meant only for her. Is Adam not here? Sarah whispered, her eyes darting nervously around the room, terrified that someone might overhear. Overhear then? When will we talk about this? Or are you planning to bury it forever? He leaned closer, his voice tinged with frustration and hurt. Adam, I don't know what to do, Sarah admitted, her voice trembling as though she were being torn apart from within. Before Adam could say anything more, another voice cut through the air, like a knife. You two seem to be having quite the conversation. don't you think? Elena stood nearby, a coffee cup in hand, her sharp gaze piercing through them. Sarah froze, feeling as though the world around her had suddenly crumbled. Just family matters, Sarah managed to say, trying to sound composed, but Elena's eyes stayed fixed on her. And Adam's family, of course, is where all the most interesting secrets lie, isn't it? Elena replied, her tone dripping with insinuation. Sarah couldn't bear the weight of Elena's gaze any longer. She stood abruptly and walked out of the restaurant, leaving Adam and Elena behind. She needed space and needed to escape the feeling of being cornered. But it wasn't over that evening as the family gathered in the small living room of the resort. Elena spoke up, suddenly. Michael, you know, I think Adam has something he'd like to share with you. Sarah's heart stopped. Elena knew she didn't have to spell it out. But the way she looked at Adam with a deliberate tone in her words made it clear she intended to drag everything into the light. Michael frowned, his gaze shifting from Elena to Adam, then finally landing on Sarah. What's going on? Michael asked, suspicion lacing his voice. Adam stood, his hands clenched into fists as though he was holding back a storm. He looked at Sarah for a long moment, his eyes questioning, asking her if he should reveal the truth. But Sarah could do nothing, paralyzed by the weight of her own guilt. Nothing, Adam finally said, his voice cold. The silence that followed was heavier than any words could have been. Sarah knew this was only the beginning. The consequences of that night, of everything they had hidden, would not fade easily. And Elena, with her cryptic smile and sharp eyes, wasn't going to let anything go quietly. Sarah left the resort early in the morning, just as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon. The car moved slowly along the winding coastal roads, leaving behind the crashing waves and overlapping memories of a vacation she knew she would never forget beside her. Her bag rested on the seat, carrying the weight of Adam's letter and her journal, an invisible burden pressing down on her mind. She told herself she needed time away to think, to find herself again after everything that had transpired. But deep down, Sarah wasn't sure if she could ever truly escape the fractured pieces of her life. On the drive home, her phone buzzed. It was Michael. Sarah glanced at the screen, but instead of answering, she let it go silent. She couldn't face his questions for which she had no answers. She didn't want to hear his voice, a voice that had once been a source of comfort but now only stirred a deep emptiness inside her. She pulled into a roadside cafe, as a quiet place with soft music playing in the background and the warm aroma of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. Choosing a secluded corner, Sarah sat down and pulled out her journal. She flipped to the next page, where the incomplete lines from the night before awaited her. She was about to write, but her eyes caught on something unusual. A folded piece of paper tucked between the pages. She hadn't placed it there. With her hands trembled as she unfolded it. The familiar handwriting leapt off the page. But it wasn't hers. Sarah, I don't know if leaving that letter this morning was the right thing to do. But I couldn't leave without saying one last thing. Elena knows everything. She didn't say it last night, but I could see it in her eyes. She won't stay silent for long. I didn't leave just for myself. I left because I know that if I stayed, I'd only make things worse for you. Michael, isn't it? Who do you think he is? He's hidden so much about me. About my mother. And maybe even about you, if you want to know the truth. Look in the places he's kept most hidden. I hope you find the answers you're looking for. Adam. Sarah stared at the letter, her blood running cold. She had no idea how it had ended up in her journal when Adam had placed it there before he left, or perhaps even earlier. Questions flooded her mind, one after another, but before she could untangle them, her phone rang again. This time it was an unfamiliar number. Sarah hesitated, then decided to answer. Sarah. Elena's voice came through, cold and calculating. We need to talk about Adam. And Michael froze, gripping the phone tightly. What do you want? She asked, her voice unsteady. And Elena let out a soft laugh, a sound that sent chills down Sarah's spine. It's not about what I want. It's about what you want. Have you ever wondered why things have unfolded this way? Why Adam feels abandoned? And why Michael always keeps you at arm's length? What are you talking about? Sarah asked, her voice trembling. But Elena didn't respond right away. I'll be waiting for you at the cafe nearby. Sarah, we need to talk about the truth. And I promise, after you hear it, you'll never look at Michael the same way again. The call ended before Sarah could say anything more. She sat there, her heart pounding in her chest. It felt as though everything, every secret, every lie, every missing piece was beginning to surface all at once. She didn't know if she was ready to face whatever Elena had to say, but she also knew there was no turning back. Sarah stepped out of the cafe, the bright sunlight bearing down on her like a reminder that the truth was waiting to be uncovered. Clutched tightly in her hand was her journal containing both her secrets and Adam's. And in that moment Sarah realized this vacation wasn't just the beginning of her world unraveling, it was an invitation to dig deeper into the secrets she had lived alongside for far too long, secrets that would change her life forever. Her car rolled forward, heading toward the cafe where Elena was waiting. Sarah didn't know what awaited her, but she knew that once the truth was revealed, it wouldn't be gentle sunlight, it would be a storm.